Alright, it's time to talk about Model View View Model, or MVVM. The first thing we should talk about is a design pattern. Now, MVVM is a design pattern, but before we define what MVVM is, we should define what a design pattern is. So, a design pattern is a way for you to structure your code in a better way. This is for you to reuse your code instead of having to implement certain parts of your code over and over. You can just use a design pattern such as MVVM to have a better structure for your code. A design pattern is usually about separating your code or your application into various modules, and in this case we will be talking about it. There are 3 modules on the MVVM design pattern. This allows for better unit testing and better teamwork for agile projects, and especially projects where there are designers and developers on the same team, which happens really often. And now a pattern is a methodology, it is not a rule, so you can change some things about it, implement it the way your team needs it to be implemented, but it really helps, especially when you're on a team. Now, I talked about this when we talked about data binding, and data binding is very related to MVVM, but I'll mention it again. A design pattern in particular is very important when you are in a team with designers and developers. Having various modules or your application divided in various modules helps designers to work on the design part of the project and developers to work in the logic part of the project. So it's much more simpler for them to create better applications. Now let's start with what MVVM is. MVVM is a design pattern exclusively for platforms which use XAML as the language to create the user interfaces. Now, MVVM, as I mentioned, has 3 modules, and the first one is the model. Actually, each of these modules conform the name MVVM. The first M stands for model, the first V stands for view, and VM is for view model. So, like I mentioned, this is very interesting, especially for teams with designers and developers working on the exact same project. Let's first talk about what the model is. So, the model is where you will abstract the problem. When you define the problem, or someone, your client, defines the problem to you, you need to start abstracting it into classes. If you have some experience developing applications, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You abstract this problem into classes which will conform objects that have information to handle. Now, the model would be those classes abstracting the problem. It's the structure of the information that you will be handling along the entire application. Now, in the model, there's no logic, there are no methods, there are no handling any information. You are just structuring the way your information is going to look like. Now, in the view, you would include the application flow. This means which page is going to navigate to which page, and of course you have to define the way those pages are going to look like. So you will define the UI and include the visual elements of your application. This is the layer in which the user interacts, because it's the one that has the input and output information. So in this layer in particular, the user will be telling the application which information to work with, and will also be looking at information or process data. Finally, the view model. Now, the view model is called this way because it establishes a relationship between the view and the model that we've already talked about. And it's in here where you would put all of the logic of your application. This is where every information is handled. Of course, this information that you handled is modeled the way your model tells it's modeled. So you get the way the information is structured from the model, you process it, handle it in the view model, and finally present it in the view. Or mainly, rather, the view gives you the information in a structured way, and the model knows that structure. You handle this information in the view model, and you show that information on the view one more time.